What's good in the YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you guys another video. Today I'm bringing you guys a video on episode 32 of Lupinranger versus Patoranger. This episode is called A Request for a Duel, and the episode overall was actually really good. It was actually probably one of the best episodes the season has had so far. I definitely will say that. There were some really cool things about it, and again, we're now about 2/3 of the way through the season, which is pretty crazy. It's just amazing to think how quickly we're moving, in my opinion, through this season, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where things will go in the future. But this episode led to some pretty important things happening, and we'll get into that in this episode right away. So let's get started. The episode begins with us seeing that, it's a continuation of the previous episode where the Patorangers failed against the gangler that they were fighting. And the thing is that they don't know what they need to do initially to deal with it because the situation's really tough. At the same time, though, Noel does have a theory, which is the fact that they're going to need to join forces. This is something that's even discussed by the Lupinrangers and Noel as well, this idea that in order for them to deal with the gangler, they're going to need to join forces. And the way that this is made clear is because shortly prior to this, I believe it was, the Lupinrangers get into a fight with the Gangler, and they try to get one of the Lupin collection pieces, but when they go about doing so, as soon as they try to open the safe, what actually happens is that it doesn't work, because in this case, even though they're all silver safes, they're all connected to each other. So in other words, you have to have all of them open at once. If you don't have all of them open at once, it just doesn't work. So that's the situation. That leads to them realizing, wait, there's 5 saves, and there's only the 4 of them. So they're going to need at least one of the Patorangers to join them in opening the safes. So that's pretty important to note. So then what happens is that Noel approaches the Patorangers about the situation, and the thing is that Kichiro is completely against the idea of working alongside the Lupinrangers, even though they had worked with them when they fought Lyman. The thing is that this time around, the stakes are even greater, and Noel decides to suggest a duel. In exchange for the duel, if they lose, Noel and the Lupinrangers will turn themselves in. But at the same time, if the Patorangers are defeated, they will fight alongside them. So, Kichiro is the one that really is always against it the most. So this episode is pretty interesting because it actually kind of opens his eyes to why to maybe side with them in the future, and we'll get into that. Anyway, what does end up happening is that I forgot to also mention this important detail. When the Lupinrangers initially fight the Gangler, they also end up dealing with Goche. And the reason why they actually retreat in the first place is because Goche actually uses a special binocular kind of Lupin collection item, and when that item is seen, that leads to Noel freaking out and basically panicking to retreat because that item is super powerful, apparently. Or at least it has a very powerful ability that, for some reason, Noel doesn't want them to know of right away. And later on, we even learn more so about that. We learn without learning. We'll get into what that means exactly towards the end. But anyway, what does end up happening is that that's something to note, and Goche does try to work even more on her Gangler, and Granio does come in at one point, so that's something to note as well. Eventually, what we do end up seeing is Noel and Kichiro end up getting into a duel against each other. This duel is pretty cool because we get to see a lot of combat and fighting moves between the two of them, and what happens is that eventually the Gangler is summoned to the Earth, and summoned to the city, and what happens is that Kichiro is busy with Noel, so Tsukasa and Sukoya end up heading off to deal with the Gangler. The Lupinrangers, in the meantime, also decide to deal with the Gangler. So we end up seeing that, first of all, Tsukasa and Sukoya fail against the Ganglers. And then what happens is that the Lupinrangers try, and they're not doing much better, but they're still able to put up more of a fight, at least it seems. And what happens is that eventually, when the situation seems tough, suddenly Kichiro and Noel, I don't know why I'm having trouble saying Kichiro today, have this moment where they appear, and it turns out that they're going to be fighting alongside each other, basically implying that you would think that Kichiro had lost against Noel. We'll get into what actually happens at the end, because they don't actually show it right away. But anyway, what does end up happening, and I forgot to mention this other detail, again, I'm a little out of order just because there's a lot going on, and I'm just trying to remember everything. There is a point where Kichiro hears from Noel about the fact that they're trying to save those they lost. That's a very important detail, obviously, because now Kichiro has an idea of the Lupinrangers' objective, and he realizes that their mission isn't one out of malice or harm. It's actually one that's a peaceful one that's meant to be a positive, not a negative, which is something that he always treated their situation as if it were for a negative cause. In fact, it's not a negative cause. They're trying to do something very positive, but now this makes him think differently, and that's something that's pretty much described later on, that this idea really seeps into his mind and makes him question everything about what he's thought of them for this whole entire time, and that will likely shape the future of the season, so keep that in mind as well. Anyway, what does end up happening is that Kichiro ends up fighting alongside the Lupinrangers. Eventually, Kairi ends up throwing the magic trigger the magic dial fighter to Kichiro, and so what happens is that Kichiro, Noel, Umika, and Toma end up using the dial fighters on the safes to actually open up the 5 safes at once. The actual Lupin collection items are all based on morphers or changers, which is actually pretty cool to see. We see like the Shadow phone from Machine Kenger, we see the G phone from Goranger, we see the Mobirit from Gokaiger, we see the Magi Cellular from Magi Ranger, and I'm forgetting right now what the 5th one was. Completely blanking on the 5th one right now, but anyway, the point is that we see all these morphers, which is very cool to see. They're all obviously recolors, which is also interesting to note, but it is still cool. I actually have the image right here of what the last one was. Oh, it was the Excel. It was the Excel one. It was the one from Bokenger. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. But yeah, so those are the 5 that we see, which is very cool. So at that point, they end up gaining those Lupin collection items. And then what happens is that we see one of the coolest final attacks, which is this combination of the 3 Lupinrangers using 3 different Kaito boosts. Because early in the episode, we actually do see Kairi use like the Splash Trigger Machine Kaito boost. But in this case, what happens is that we end up seeing 3 Kaito boosts being used, and then we end up seeing Noel, doing his finisher, and then we see Patoranger Ugo being used. So all 5 of these things happen at once, which is so cool to watch in combat. A really, really, really cool moment, and they do manage to defeat the Gangler. The Gangler then, with Gochi's help, is turned big, and so then what happens is that the Lupinrangers and the Power Rangers and they're combining forces and forming Good Cool Kaiser. So we haven't seen Good Cool Kaiser in quite some time, so it's very cool to see it return. And we actually get to see something new this time, which is that initially, they're using their standard combination. They're actually getting along better than they have gotten along in the past when they've worked together. So that's something to note as well, because they're actually able to talk to each other inside of the cockpit, although they're not necessarily completely on each other's side the whole time. But what we do end up seeing is that initially, Kajiro ends up using the crane trigger machine and the biker trigger machine that replaced the top pieces, which were like where the red, the blue dial fighter and the yellow dial fighter were. So they actually replaced them with these new attachments. And then what happens is that they're all impressed by that, and then they end up switching it so that Kairi ends up using the scissors dial fighter to replace it, and the cyclone dial fighter. So those are the two that replace it. We see attacks from those. We also see leg attacks from Tsukasa and Sequoia. So like all these different things happen, and then they do their big finisher. But it's cool to see the attachments can swap. I mean, that's something that I've known about for a while now, but it's good to finally see it in the show and see how that actually functions. That was very cool to watch, and I like the idea of that, and it will be very interesting to see how future attachments will work. Because again, there are other ones, and we only saw those ones. We didn't see if, like, say, Magic Dial Fighter or Splash Trigger Machine work in conjunction with Good Cool Kaiser. It would be cool if they do. I just don't know. But we do know that the other ones that I just mentioned do work with it. So that's something to note as well. Anyway, following this, after they defeat the Gangler, what happens is that the Lupinrangers give the 5 Lupin collection pieces to Kagori. He's very happy to get all of them. And then what happens is that they explain to Kagori about how when Noel saw the binocular Lupin collection item, he kind of made us disappear from it, and he didn't explain what it was, and he seemed kind of worried about it. And the thing is that when Kagori hears this, he perks up as well, and clearly he knows why that would lead to a reaction from Noel. Clearly meaning that Lupin collection item has some important power or does something pretty special, which we'll probably get to know fairly soon, I would imagine. But it is interesting to note that. So that is something to look forward to finding out more about. Eventually, what does end up happening is that we also end up seeing from Noel's perspective about what actually happened with the fight between him and Kichiro. What actually happened is that Kichiro technically won the battle. The thing is that when Kichiro heard about the whole situation with the loved ones and everything like that, that basically made him change his perspective of Noel and the Lupinrangers, because they're all fighting for people they love, and they're not doing stuff just to harm people or cause trouble or bother them. They're doing things because they need to do them. So it's something worth noting. And what happens is that Kichiro actually cares. We actually see following this, Noel, first of all, he ends up shooting like the chest, but like off of a part of Noel's suit that was more or less something that wouldn't cause harm to Noel. And what happens is that following that, Noel counters the attack without actually hurting Kichiro. So that's what happens there. And, Noel recognizes this in him, and he knows that they're going to work together in the end, like become a united team, even though there's a lot of tension right now. And still has been, but it's definitely seeming like things are going to shift, more so now after this episode. And in fact, when we end up seeing things continue, it actually shows Kichiro, looking out and thinking about, the Lupinrangers, and figuring out the fact that they're fighting for their loved ones, and wondering what will happen when all the Lupin collection items are gathered. He doesn't know, but he wants to know, and he cares about them now. He's thinking about them. There's something in him now that makes him shift his mindset, and that could lead to a really interesting future for the show, because now, rather than being complete enemies, there's potential for this shift that could lead to, them united forces. Now, I don't know when that will actually happen. I'm hoping by episode 40 we'll have that happen, if not sooner. But again, no idea as of now as to when it will actually occur. But I'm hoping for sooner rather than later. We'll have to wait and see, of course. As far as things go otherwise, what else can I say? The preview clip shows that the Lupinrangers will be turned into kids, so that will be interesting to see. We will be seeing Patoranger Ugo used alongside Noel. There will be the Pat Kaiser train formation used, and also another combination used, so that will be interesting to see. Otherwise, that's about it that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the next episode, and I'm looking forward to seeing how things will progress from here. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I love to know your guys' opinions about this episode, and until the next video, see you guys. Bye bye.